It's big. He hits two back. He's done it. Sharma has done it. And the end, delirious.
Hello and welcome to The Last Wicket, a podcast for anyone and everyone who believes that there is no such thing as too much cricket. I'm your host, Benny, and I'm joined by a few friends, Mayank,
Hey everyone.
Nish,
Hello, everyone.
and Himanish.
Hi guys.
And to kickstart our podcast this week, we will be examining England's track record against playing spin in India and the approach that could bring about improved results for them. We will also be hearing from English cricket blogger James Marsh, aka at Pavilion Opinion on Twitter, about his thoughts on the England squad for the first two tests against India. And later in the episode, we'll take a look back at some of the more memorable moments in past India versus England encounters. So, as you can see, this is a pretty heavy England versus India centric episode. So, buckle in. So, before we get to all of that, guys, we made it. Just over a month from conceiving the idea, assembling this team, setting up the show. The Last Wicket podcast is finally live, and I couldn't be more thrilled. In a moment, each co-host will introduce themselves, but I wanted to very quickly tell you what we hope to achieve through this podcast. So here at The Last Wicket, we're just a regular bunch of US-based cricket fans who aim to inform and entertain, and somewhere in between, talk to other cricket fans and experts to get their perspectives on the game we all love. So we will analyze hot topics, debate polarizing issues, chat with knowledgeable folks, and just have fun doing all of the above. So thank you, dear listener, for tuning in, and we hope you stay with us for what promises to be an exciting journey. Now, without further ado, we'll hear from the rest of my team. So first up, I will throw it to Himanish.
Hi guys, I'm Himanish. I'm a graduate student in physics in the US. I work on computer simulations of the early universe. When I'm not doing that, I try to watch cricket in a bad time zone. I also write periodically for ESPN Cricinfo. I do numbers pieces for them. So through this podcast, I hope to chat with a few interesting people and hopefully bring numbers to a wider range of people because people are still scared of numbers in cricket, although we shouldn't be. So that's what I'm hoping to do.
Wait, am I saying your name wrong? Is it Himanish or Himanish?
You can say either because people have mispronounced it so many times in so many ways that it doesn't matter now.
I'm going to go with Himanish.
Actually, if you look at the
with you.
Sanskrit version of it, it's Himanish, but that's too long for even me to say it.
Himanish.
Okay,
Yeah.
well,
So I don't say that. So you can say anything, like it's okay.
all right. We already learned one new thing this episode. All right, next up, Mayank.
Hey everyone. So I grew up in New Delhi, and like everyone in India, was very passionate about cricket and wanted to be India's next Rahul Dravid. When that didn't work out, I ended up in the US, and now I live in Chicago and work as a tech consultant. I think in my mind, there's a lot of folks out there who love cricket, who watch cricket, but they also have a lot of misconceptions. So I want to examine all of those questions and use data, use different perspectives to really understand what we can do and spread that through this podcast. Looking forward to it.
Perfect. All right, Nish, you're up.
Hello, everyone. My name is Nish, and like my fellow co-hosts here, I live in the US, and I've been passionate about cricket for longer than I can remember. Through this podcast, I want to achieve all of the things that my co-hosts mentioned, as well as keep the game dear to me alive and throbbing with life. I hope to be part of the successful journey.
All right. Well, thanks, Nish. And finally, I'm Benny. I go by at the real Benny Man on Twitter. I currently live in the beautiful state of Virginia in the US, where I work in the healthcare field, specifically clinical research. But if it was up to me, I would spend all my time watching cricket, reading about the game, talking about it with anyone who cares to listen. For me, cricket has been the one constant in my life. So I see this podcast just as a great opportunity to share this passion with other fans and express it in a medium that I really love. So, we have a crack team of hosts on this podcast, and I can't wait for all you listeners to get to know us over time and enjoy the show that we will keep putting up. So let's get to it. We are all set for another bumper test series as India take on the touring England side over 4 matches. This will be England's 17th trip to India for a test series, and they have won 2 out of the last 10. Now, both teams are coming off contrasting away series victories, and should be pumped up for this clash with plenty of subplots that will decide the outcome. So we at the Last Wicket are going to specifically focus on one area, England versus spin in India. So traditionally, visiting batsmen come to India expecting rank turners and spin from both ends for long passages of play. And there is this perception that Indian spinners at home have had a tremendous amount of control over the English batsmen historically. So in this segment, we're going to go a little deeper and separate reality from myth. So to start off, let's look at some stats or just what's happened in recent England trips. So I'm going to throw it to Himanish. Do you have something for us?
Right. So first of all, I think the proportion of wickets taken by Indian pacers in India is also growing with time over the past 5 years. So we shouldn't discount the pacers. But having said that, coming to spin now, if you look at ball by ball data since 2005, there are a few English batsmen who've had a fair amount of success against spin. If you look at Cook, he averages 53.73 over 13 matches. If you look at Peterson, he averages 42 over 12 matches. Joe Root averages 50 over 6 matches. And Strauss averaged 71 over 5 matches, but three of those names are not playing anymore. So if you look at the more recent numbers since 2014 in India, which is one series basically, Root averages 46.25, Bairstow averages 61, Moeen Ali averages 43.5. And you have Hasib Hamid averaging 42 against spin and Keaton Jennings 58.5. So those two aren't playing. Ben Stokes averages 30.62 and he gets out once every 65 balls to spin in India. Joss Butler averages 38 only. So apart from Root, there is not really solidity in the English batting lineup when it comes to facing spin. Now, their top three are vulnerable and they're inexperienced. They just came off a series in Sri Lanka where Crawley averaged 8 over 2 matches, so that's not a huge sample size. Sibley and Bess also averaged very low, so they haven't had a big score in these conditions. So, although historically they've succeeded in the previous series, which was in 2012, in 2016 they had a fair few flat pitches. So, that's why their runs were inflated. But even counting for that, you have only Root who's had any sort of experience against spin. Bairstow is okay, but I think he's not playing the first 2 games. Is that right?
Correct, yes.
Yes. So Bairstow isn't playing the first 2 games. Bairstow averages 61. So yeah, so Root should be their mainstay against the Indian spinners in this series, which will form the core of the battle between the two sides.
I'm looking at these numbers and I'm just surprised that, the averages are much better than I expected. I don't know if it was just in my head that, English batsmen, I don't know if it's the media narrative, but, there's a lot of focus every time England comes to India. We talk about how are the English batsmen going to play against spin, and this comes from English journalists. So I'm just surprised that the numbers are not as bad as I thought. What is your take on that?
That's because the previous series they played here was basically all flat pitches. It was
Okay.
all pitches where both the teams crossed 300 multiple times, 400 multiple times. It was that sort of a series. And specifically, the last and the first tests were very heavy for the spinners. There was a lot of runs scored. I don't remember the score lines exactly, but yeah. So that series was played on flat batting friendly pitches, and that's why you see these inflated averages.
Okay. And Mayank, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so I think I was going to say something similar to what you said, that I think numbers wise, if I look, and I know Himanish talked about spin specifically, but I was looking at generally in this century in India, how English batsmen have done. Even Collingwood is another one who averages over 50. And so numbers wise, those are obviously respectable numbers. But when you look at the various series that we've played, I think probably 2012 had the one series which had a lot of turning tracks, but other than that we've generally given out tracks which are fairly good for batting, which is why they've been able to make the runs. And yeah, I think India has succeeded because we've ended up being even better at those pitches. But for sure it's not been a struggle for them, like I think one of the examples Manish mentioned was average of 8 across 2 tests in Sri Lanka. They've definitely not been that bad across the 20 years in this century.
And looking at that, I'm just surprised they didn't care enough to put Johnny Bairstow in the first 2 games. He seems to be one of the more, the better experienced players when it comes to spin. And of course, he's also had a considerable amount of success in the IPL. has a lot of experience playing spinners there. So I'm surprised they didn't, throw him in for the first two tests. Do you think there are going to be is there a different approach that these players can use, in the upcoming series? Is there something that could kind of change the trend from how they have performed historically?
So, I mean, I think that's an interesting question. I think there's a lot of talk about how over the years there's been a lot of talk about how English batsmen primarily use the sweep to score a lot of their runs against spin, and it's true. And they also obviously, because they play the shot so much, they often get out to it. And many columnists have written how sweep is the reason why England loses in India, which is arguable. But I think overall, I think definitely a blueprint of how to succeed against spin, and you've seen that not just amongst like Joe Root, but also if you look at Pujara, if you look at all the wonderful players who spin across the world, they all have this habit of stepping down the wicket or having a good front stride, and that really helps them get to the pitch of the ball and make the most of that. Or minimize the chances of the spinner taking a wicket. So I think that obviously is an approach to think about, and especially if you think about how Kuldeep bowls or how Ashwin bowls, they both try to get the batsman on the front foot, get both edges involved. If the wicket is turning, if not, then just use their variety to do that. And so that's definitely something that I'm sure the English batsman will have.
And Nish, what did you want to add to that?
Yeah, that's a good point that Mayank just made. I was watching the recently concluded Test series against Sri Lanka, and Joe Root scored a magnificent 228 out of 400 odd runs, and a majority of the runs in that innings were sweep shots. Now he did play some other amazing drives as well, but the sweep shots were not your conventional sweep shots which went to square leg. These went to mid wicket, so he was sweeping Embledenia from an outside off stump line all the way to deep mid wicket. I mean, I've not seen that many players do that with repeating success over a long innings of 228 runs. So I guess there is some sort of a template in, perhaps sweeping the spinners, but you have to be careful. And Root is closing in on 100 tests. So I don't know how confident Lawrence and Ollie Pope will be doing similar strategy against much more potent bowlers again in Ashwin and Yadav in home conditions.
That
I think the
actually,
key to playing spin is judging the length early and either going fully on your front foot or going back, right? Now, the sweep is a sort of a cop out in this sense that if you can't reach the pitch of the ball, you sweep the ball. Now, Ashwin is a bit of a floaty bowler. He doesn't bowl quick. Kuldeep is a floaty bowler. So the one person who can be a threat to the sweep is Akshar if they play him because
Akshar
he's a
Patel.
tall bowler. So the problem with the sweep is if there's bounce in the wicket, you can get an edge, which doesn't happen in India or Sri Lanka. But if a bowler like Akshar is bowling at the stumps, then the sweep is a little dicey to play. So that should be the strategy for India at least. Uh, yeah, but usually when you look at the Anglo-spheric batsmen playing spin in India, so the problem is that outside India, you can survive by not reaching the pitch of the ball because the ball doesn't turn. So you can survive. Also, outside India, because the pitches don't turn, spinners bowl slowly. So you can play full balls of the back foot. In India, you can't do that because you bowl fast spin. You bowl faster. So you can't go onto the back foot and play full balls. And that's why you'll see the two most common modes of dismissal for foreign batsmen in India are them not reaching the pitch of the ball or them getting caught on the back foot. So that's what they've got to guard against and judge the length of the ball early. That's what they don't do usually.
And Mayank?
Yeah, so the one good point about the pace that Himanish mentioned is something that I also read about the 2012 series, where the pitches had a little bit in them for spin, and both Monty and Swan were a little bit quicker through, and that allowed them to get the turn while not giving the batsman the time to adjust. And so that's a really good point where Ashwin, being who was very young at that point, not as experienced, he continued to bowl his regular slower pace, and that allowed the batsman to score a little bit, and they ended up winning the series. Not taking anything away from KP or Cook, but that obviously played an important part. So that's a really good.
And that's actually a very good segue for what I wanted to add to that. So recently, former England batsman Kevin Peterson, he shared screenshots of an email sent to him by Rahul Dravid with tips on playing spin. So I want to read some excerpts here and get your thoughts on that. So this is what he said, Rahul Dravid. So quote, against guys who bowled a bit quicker, I would look to go forward without committing or planting the front foot. What can happen is we look to go forward, which is correct, but because we are so keen to get forward and not get trapped on the back foot, sometimes you can plant that front foot too early. So it sends the timing all wrong and forces your bat to come down too quickly, resulting in you pushing at it rather than letting it come to you. Also, then if it turns, you are more liable to follow the ball rather than holding your line and letting it spin past. Also, that results in what we would call hard hands, which is nothing but pushing out. So if your transfer weight brings your bat down, that's perfect because it always puts the bat in the right place. And he also says, you can practice a few things though in the nets, try and pick up length from the bowler's hand. That'll force you to watch it closely. Look to go forward, but recognize that a lot of the scoring opportunities are of the back foot. So while you're looking to go forward, you are not committing. The key word is looking. You are ready to rock back and pick some runs if you can. And I liked what former Zimbabwe captain Tatenda Taibu, he replied to that. He said, when Anil Kumble got me out 3 out of 4 times in my first 2 tests in India, I got advice from Dravid to play him like a slow, medium-pace bowler, but with bat in front of the pads while still playing late, and most importantly, watching the ball very closely. And I have to say, that is very generous of Dravid there. That is a lot of advice. So Mayank,
Yeah,
what are your thoughts on that? And do you think those are some of the reasons why visiting batsmen fail against spin in India?
I think that's very possible. You're right. I mean, it's pretty interesting that Dravid gave that advice to Tarinder Taibu as well. Hopefully, the series was over, and he gave that advice after. But yeah, I think one of the things about like not just spin bowling, but if you think about Suresh Raina or sort of Ganguly, who were known to have a weakness of the short ball, they had this premeditation of being on the back foot. So having a sort of premeditation obviously allows them to counter that short ball, and similarly going on the front foot to spinners allows batsmen to be ready for the ball to turn. But the downside is, because you're already in that mindset, you end up having hard hands, as Raul points out, or you end up not following the ball, which is actually good in this case. So there's obviously downsides to it, but in general, I think that's very solid advice, and I think uh, kind of goes back to one of the points that Himanish made, where outside India, when the wickets are not turning as much, you can afford to stay back and get away with it, get away
Right.
with spin. So that doesn't necessarily teach batsmen or teach them at an early age that they need to come forward when the ball is turning. So that, I think, combination of that is could be a pretty good understanding of why some visiting batsmen don't do as well.
Okay.
And you can look
can
at
I just
Pujara and you can see that what Dravid is saying is what Pujara does. So the forward press has to be not fully committed so that you're in a good position to either go to the front or the back. And the moment Pujara sees a short ball, he will hit it. He will rock back and hit it. So that's the key. You have to use your feet perfectly and you have to gauge the length early, like Dravid says. So that's how you score against spin. You push the length shorter because you're coming forward and forward and forward. And the moment you see a short ball, you hit it.
And Nish, did you have something to add to that?
yeah, I just wanted to understand why is Dravid giving away our secrets before the series?
I think this was probably after. This was at least for Taibu. He
Hopefully.
said it was. Taibu said it was during the drinks break. I don't know if it was after the game was virtually decided, but I think for KP it was. I don't know. It was much later. But no, Dravid is a nice guy. We all know that.
Yeah, so
Too
this
nice
is against
sometimes.
Bangladesh. So this was after the series, and
Okay.
this was before a series against Bangladesh, and this is part of KP's book. This is not recent.
Right.
It's part of
Right.
KP's book, which came out like a few
Yeah,
years ago, and
Right.
that
this
makes
was
sense.
publicized then. Yeah, and the
Now,
screenshot is from the book as well. Yeah,
right. Now,
yeah.
there's not going to be any Anil Kumble, but England are going to be up against a fired up spinner in Ravichandran Ashwin, who probably has a point to prove because while he has 254 wickets in 43 matches at home with an impressive average of 22.8, he averages 37.7 against England at home. Himanish, what do you make of those numbers? Why does that look strange?
So series averages are deceptive is the answer to this. because this is composed of two series that were played
Right.
4 years apart. And the 2012 series was when Ashwin was very early in his career. He was inexperienced. He couldn't uh, make sense of the pitches. So in that series, he averaged some 54 or something. And then in 2016, he had an on and off series. So, like I told you, those were flat pitches. In the first game, I think he took only one wicket and he conceded more than 150 runs. In the 3 games in the middle, he took 24 wickets at an average of 15 to 20, I think. And in the last game, again, you had a flat pitch because India made 700, England made 400. And I think he was carrying an injury. So those stats are a little deceptive because the sample size is so low. And his performance in 2012 doesn't really matter now. He's a much improved bowler.
Right.
So although the numbers say that his average is 37 and so on, but he did perform well in patches in the previous series as well. And there's no reason that he won't be a threat to England this time.
Yeah, go ahead, Mike.
Yeah, so I agree with that 2016 comment. So I think one of the things I was looking at when I was looking at that series, I decided to also look at the pitches that India creates in general. And since 2016 started, in the I looked at match totals to sort of get an idea of what kind of pitches are in India, and really in 40 times that I looked at match totals, when I excluded minnows, only 6 times, meaning there are not a lot of super tough pitches to bat on, and 17 those match totals were actually in excess of 600. So there's plenty of good wickets to bat on as well. So the fact that Ashwin actually averages 22 in these times, or I guess 22 is his overall India average, but I think he averages 25 in the last 5 years in India. That's actually very, very good considering the pitches are. And I do agree that that 2012 series was an outlier, and that's really making the numbers look worse than they are.
Okay, and Nish, did you have something to add to that?
Yeah, well, not to this per se, but I know we're talking heavy focus on spin, and do you guys think that we will miss Jadeja? I know it's kind of like an obvious question to say yes, but is Aksar an equal replacement for Jadeja, you think, or can he prove to be one over the time of the series?
That's a good question. I mean, I think Jadeja in general has been very, very solid in India. It'll be very hard for Akshar to replace that, and that's like, even if I take out his Jadeja's batting, if I only concentrate on his bowling, even then it'll be pretty hard to match Jadeja's returns. And the reason for that is I think he's one extremely accurate. I don't think Patel is as accurate as Jadeja. Uh, and the other factor about him is he's also varies his length. So we've seen in the even the recent series that he actually got a couple of batsmen LBW to Yorker type length. So he surprises batsmen a little bit. Whatever I've seen of Akshar Patel, and that's mostly been limited to one days and T20s. I don't think that he necessarily has that much control as much as Jadeja does.
I see. Interesting.
Hey, Manish, were you going to say anything related to that?
Not really. I just agree with Mayank that Jadeja is valuable because he's like an accurate sling machine. Like he puts the same ball in the same place 500 times in a day, and even he doesn't know which ball will turn and which won't. So that's what makes him so dangerous on Indian pitches. And sometimes he's more dangerous than Ashwin is. It takes a lot to replicate that because when he was dropped in 2014 or 15, he went to the Ranji Trophy and he bowled like hundreds of overs and he took backfuls of 5 wickets hauls. So he's really honed that test match length and line and that accuracy very well. And it takes a lot of time to perfect that. And we sometimes take him for granted because he's not a regular feature in the ODI sides and all. But test match bowling, Jadeja is very, very hard to replace. And Akshar can only hope to like be a decent sort of placeholder for him over the series. But I think Ashwin and Kuldeep should play first up, but they are fairly similar bowlers in terms of the speeds they bowl. So Kuldeep is a bit slower. So yeah.
Well, let's flip this around now. Visiting spinners don't always succeed the same way as the Indian spinners do. So does this speak to the quality of the spinners themselves, or is it just the Indian batsmen, they're just simply too good? Himanish.
So it's a combination of both. So first of all, there's this narrative that Indian batsmen don't play spin well somehow. But if you look at the averages of batsmen against spin over the past 5 years, India have the highest average 50. Pakistan are next with 40. So India do play spin very well. What happens is that the difference between your expectations and your reality sort of drives your narrative. So if India collapse a couple of times to Moeen Ali, who's an all-rounder, or Nathan Lyon, who's not a very big spinner, then the narrative will sort of get driven to that India don't play spin well. It's not true. Like the record says that they do play spin well. If you look at the overall numbers versus spin since 2016, Pujara averages 97.21 against spin. He's faced
Wow.
3,600 balls against spin. Mayank averages 96. He's played only 9 matches, so that's a low sample size. Kohli averages 86. Rohit averages 75. So there's no reason to believe that India don't play spin well. In fact, apart from Rahane, everyone plays spin better than they play pace in India as well. If you look at the numbers, numbers versus spin in India. So in India, Kohli averages 103 against. Rohit averages 92. Pujara averages 86. Rahul averages 59. Vijay averages 59. So there's no water to this fact that India don't play spin well. So first of all, the baseline fact is that Indians are very, very good players of spin because they played thousands and thousands of balls against good spinners in their domestic circuit. And all these people who make the test team average 50, 60, 70 in Ranji Trophy. So they are very, very good players. Now, the other thing is that when you have teams like England and New Zealand and South Africa, Australia visiting, their bowling culture is pace heavy, right? So
Right.
you don't really give them the pitches to build spinners. And if you don't have spinners in your first class system, then you don't give them the opportunity to learn how to construct wickets over long spells. In
Hmm.
fact, Bess and Leach, who are coming, both play for Somerset, and Somerset have been lauded for making those pitches conducive to spin so that they can hone these spinners. So, because you don't focus on spin 90% of your time in those countries, you can't make good bowlers. You can't just pick two bowlers out of nowhere and bring them to India and hope they succeed. And that's what these teams do usually. And that's why
Right.
they don't succeed because there has to be an optimal trajectory, a length, a drift, and a dip that you perfect over time to beat these batsmen who themselves are perfect at playing spin. So it's a combination of both these factors. And that's why you see all these players average so high against spin.
And I think one point you kind of made, Himanish, was England have been producing good spinners in at Somerset where they have spin friendly tracks. It's interesting that even while they're producing two spinners who are both in the national side, they've been deducted points for preparing spin friendly pitches. So that
Oh,
really
really?
tells you about So that really tells you about the culture that you sort of mentioned, that their culture is very much focused towards pace bowling, and that's obviously it's like, I think once Harsha Bhogle said, it's being a spinner in South Africa is like being a vegetarian. You don't really have too many options, and that's very true for all of many of these spinners. There's really not that many options. They don't get a lot of support. And the one other thing, I think Jared Kimber had a podcast on this recently where he mentioned that England have played 12 spinners since Graham Swan retired. And interestingly, many of them, they've not really given a long run. They've brought them in, they've given them a few games. They've said, oh, this is not working out, let's move on. They've not said, here's a young spinner, we see the ability, we're going to give him time. And I think for the first time, they're doing that in Bess. And Jack Leach is pretty decent as well, but it's their first tour. I don't necessarily anticipate them being a lot of trouble for Indian batsmen.
Okay. And Nish?
Yeah, and to Mayank's and Himanish's point, right? Like regarding the culture of not having spin or equating spin on day one or day two equals something bad or negative, right? That's a point that Graham Swan made in a podcast in a Sky Sports podcast when he was talking with Nasser Hussain, that if England pitches turned on day one or day two, people will be up in arms saying that, oh, this is an absolute crisis of pitches or curators, and we need to address this issue at the earliest, right? So Swan was saying that we need to get away from that culture and we need to get into a culture of where spin equals good, regardless of day one or day two or day three or whatever it is, right? We need to get the mindset change from the grassroots level to see effects in international level, like himself and like Monty for an extent of time, and other successful spinners all around. So it is a culture thing, right? Like if an Indian pitches, I would imagine a similar reaction for folks in India as well. If the pitches didn't turn and if assisted C movement in day was 1, 2, and 3 heavily, then we would be slightly questioning because we've been brought up in that sort of like, expectation mindset. So it's an interesting thought there.
But that culture, we talk about that culture, and it's funny because I remember a time when when I say we, I'm talking about like the Indian cricket fans or just the Indian cricket board. They were just so focused on ensuring that the players, especially the fast bowlers, got tracks that were favorable to them so that when they went abroad, they could succeed. Do you remember the debates about preparing seam friendly or fast bowler friendly pitches in India? And then Virat Kohli, I mean, he's one of the biggest advocates for developing a very strong pace bowling attack. And we're seeing the results of that now over the last few years, and particularly in the most recent Australia series. So I
Right.
think if people put their mind to it, and I'm talking about other countries, right, where they are probably not as spin focused as some of the Asian sides. I mean, you look at Bangladesh, like almost all of their main attack is built around spin. I think if more teams adopted that, they don't have to change their culture of focusing on fast bowlers, but at least giving some importance to their spinners. And I think that would make contests in
Right.
India more even because now you have two evenly matched sides, produces good cricket rather than India just bullying the opposition with their spinners.
And I think that's a really interesting point because it should be fairly obvious for boards to recognize that, because if you look at what India have done over the past few years, where they've been incredible at home and they've competed abroad, it's because of that very fact that we have
Right.
pacers who can compete abroad, and we're very good at home with both spin and our reverse swing, the way our pacers bowl. But if you look at other countries, as I said, like Somerset example is perfect because they got deducted points, and so that's their sort of there's no incentive for them to continue preparing that kind of pitches. They're not going to continue having those spinners. So yeah, they'll go and compete in South Africa. They might compete in Australia, but at the end of the day, they won't be competent all over the world. They will always have a little bit of a fight in Asia. And I know they just won in Sri Lanka, but that Sri Lankan team also was fairly depleted, and it wasn't their best performance by any means. But to be consistently beating sides across the world, you need both types of. You're not going to win in UAE, you're not going to win in India if you don't have any spinners or any quality spinner.
And Himanish?
There's also a historical reason for this, right? Because historically, there's been no emphasis on really winning in the subcontinent. And there are
Mm,
racial reasons for that, or whatever you might call it. But it's only recently that teams have realized that, India is a powerhouse and winning in India is important. And so the culture will change gradually, but there's been no emphasis on winning in these countries throughout much of our history. So that's changing, and that's one of the reasons why they don't have teams that are optimized to win in India.
And then it's funny, Indian fans are so focused on the so-called SENA countries, right? South Africa, England, New Zealand, and Australia, but I don't see any other teams talking about, I don't know, PIBS, Pakistan, India, Bangladesh, Sri
Yeah,
Lanka.
yeah, yeah,
We
yeah.
should
So
make that a thing.
that is the imbalance of history that piques a lot of fans in India as well. Because to be considered a good batsman, you need to have performed in these Sena countries, but you don't have a
Right.
similar filter for Sena batsmen. So Ponting
Right.
average low 30s in India, but no one talks about that. So why? Yeah, so there's
And
that reason as well.
And I like the fact that you mentioned the racial angle because if you think about it, West Indies should definitely be in that Sena category. Like, okay, I get
Mm.
it. Like, you don't care for spin, so you remove Sri Lanka. But why West Indies? Like, there's no reason whatsoever. But yeah, it's just a historical reason, as you said.
Yeah, go ahead, Nish.
Also, it's quite surprising that Bumrah is going to be playing his first Test match. I know we're going to a fast bowler talk
Yeah,
here. Bumrah is going to play his first Test match after seems
almost.
like he's been playing for India forever. So it's quite surprising that he's playing his first Test match at home.
All right, so we are going to leave it there. We're going to find out soon how the English batsmen are going to handle the Indian spinners. There's no doubt in my mind that this will shape the outcome of the series. Regardless, this sets the stage for what should be a very engrossing series. So up next, we will have a conversation with James Marsh about the England squad for the first two tests. So stay with us. I'm so excited to speak with our first ever guest on the podcast. He is a blogger who has his own cricket newsletter on Substack. called Pavilion Opinions. He has guest written columns for First Post in the recent past and even co hosted the Radio Cricket podcast for a few years. He is one of the funnier cricket writers that I know, and he typically saves his best wit for English cricket. Blogger, teacher, copywriter, James Marsh. Welcome to The Last Wicket.
Hello, Benny. Yes, thank you very much. Yes,
Was,
it's a pleasure to be here.
nice to have you. Was that introduction a little too much?
No, it's fine. I shall attempt to live up to it, to the
Well,
status of blogger, the vaunted status of blogger. I'll
yes.
see if I-
Well, let me tell you why I'm so excited to have you on. I've known you on and off for 10 years now. 2011, the golden summer of cricket blogging, is how I consider that to be. Didn't you have a blog on Blogspot? Was that the one?
I think, yes, Blogspot, and then it sort of morphed into Blogger, I believe, yes. But
Right.
yes,
And
halcyon days.
and I had a blog called likeatracerbullet.com. I don't know if anybody remembers that.
I
Um,
suppose not, eh?
So I remember we used to share each other's posts and we talked about a bunch of stuff related to cricket and even movies occasionally. So I've known you since then, but this is the first time that we are speaking face to face, so to speak. And I've always enjoyed your writing and your occasional tweets, which I feel are always retweetable content. So I'm really excited to finally be able to have a longer conversation with you.
Yeah, I aim to provide content. I don't know
Yes.
if you can add much more to it, but I do provide.
Anyway, I'm just excited to have you on, and I'm excited to talk to you about what's coming up. So let's get to it. Team England is coming off a convincing series win in Sri Lanka, where they have notched 6 consecutive test wins. So Joe Root had a bumper season. Dom Bess and Jack Leach formed a potent spin pair. The likes of Broad and Anderson continue to be as solid as they were a decade ago. As an English cricket fan, how do you feel about their chances in the upcoming India series?
Well, thank you, Benny, for drawing attention to what's, I think, comfortably the most impressive away Test series victory there's been so
Right.
far in 2021. The England triumph in Sri Lanka. I'm honestly not sure how I feel about it. I mean, I think it's. I mean, I tend to not to really look at series in a sort of partisan way anymore, much as I've spent a great deal of my life fretting about the
Why
team
not?
being.
It's fun though.
Well, it is, yes, but I think it's. But I'm sort of. I mean, it was 4-0, wasn't it? Last time the teams in India, so you're
Yes.
obviously looking at a massive turnaround there. But it's. I think it's going to be a series of matchups. I believe in the podcast you're going to be looking at spin. So I think obviously Root versus Ashwin. Root was obviously sweeping his way to beat in
Right.
Sri Lanka. So how he deals with Ashwin, I think is going to be key. I was just looking back actually at how some other players have tried to combat Ashwin over the years, not in any great sort of analytical depth, but I came across David Warner's strategy in 2017 when he suggested that for the third test at Ranchi, he was going to utilise the reverse sweep as a tactic against Ashwin, which
Okay.
I found a little bit surprising. He actually ended up negating Ashwin by getting out cheaply to Jadeja in both innings. So, but anyway, I was just having a look at this because I think that will be a big matchup. Just on the other side of things, I think I'm looking forward to seeing how Gill plays against Anderson. Obviously, Anderson's had success with the new and old ball in India. Sachin famously talked about Anderson's reverse that he was able to get. And I just think Gill is just so wonderful. He's just so regal. And it's going to be really fantastic to see how he copes with Warden Anderson after how well he did in Australia. And obviously England are going to be analysing him to bits at the moment. The only person who's going to be analysing him more closely is Gil's father, who famously,
Like
after his
all good
91,
Indian fathers, yes.
yeah, well, I'll leave that to you to comment on, but he famously criticised his son for not getting a century in the last
Yes.
test, only in 91. And he highlighted his son's very slight technical deficiency where he doesn't quite bring the bat down straight, and that sort of emphasises when he doesn't move his feet a little bit.
At least it was
But yes,
constructive. That was good.
yeah, well, yeah, perhaps you could perhaps be grateful for that. But yeah, so I guess those are the two things that I'm looking for. Yeah, I mean, you mentioned spin. I mean, obviously from India's side, they're going to be without Jadeja. It'll be quite interesting to see who England go into the series with. I'm a big fan of Dom Bess. I think he's pretty exciting player. He seems to me at times a sort of leg spinner trapped in an off spinner's body. He doesn't quite have the control you might expect from an off spinner, but you know, can bowl some absolute ripper deliveries. So obviously Moeen Ali is back in the squad for these tests, who's done well against India before with the ball, ironically more at home, and with the bat in India. I think he's got a couple of test tons in India, so that'll be interesting. But what do you see as the biggest sort of areas of competition in the test?
Like you mentioned, I feel Root versus the spinners, I think will be a big part of what is going to decide the series. Because even looking at the Sri Lanka series that England won, I was looking at the the scorecard, and really apart from Root, there wasn't really any big runs from any of the other batsmen. So he practically dragged the team to a series victory there. So if the English, and I don't want to just say the spinners, but if the Indian bowling attack, because we have a pretty decent fast bowling attack as well, if we can keep Joe Root silent, the way the Indian team was able to frustrate Stephen Smith in the recent Australia series, if they can do something similar to Joe Root, I think that will be a big part of what is going to decide the outcome of the series. I want to credit the bowlers too. Dom Bess and Jack Leach, they did good in Sri Lanka, but they're going to, come against. I want to give credit to the Sri Lankan batsmen. They're obviously international players, but I feel the Indian batsmen will be just a bit tougher to bowl to.
Yeah.
And I don't know how England can force a win if their spinners don't join the party. So I think those two things will decide the series in a big way.
Yeah, just a couple of things about. I mean, one of the sort of not to disparage Khan or Srinath or anything for the past, but I mean it is one of the great sort of beauties of the way that Indian cricket has evolved over the last sort of 10 years is the sort of wonderful pace bowling stocks that you've got now, and I think especially against
it's really hard to imagine, as a fan who started following the Indian cricket team in the late 90s, to actually, it's hard to believe that we have a bowling attack, a fast bowling attack that is probably one of the best in the world right now. It's still hard to accept some days.
Yeah, perhaps especially so for Pakistan fans, I imagine. But I think one of the luxuries. I mean, England really struggled against the new ball, against Mbudenia in Sri Lanka. And one of the luxuries that Kohli's going to have is, I mean, I can't really envisage Ashwin taking the new ball that often, but having seen how sort of incompetent England were against a spinning new ball in Sri Lanka, that's an option they have, particularly with Ashwin's guile. So yeah, I mean, we've got, obviously there's a lot of changes in the England side as well. One of them is that Burns is going to come back probably to open with Sibley, who sort of eventually Sibleyed his way to a half century in Sri Lanka, but it might not be the most aesthetically pleasing opening pair that India has ever encountered. But I think they will be crucial. So it will be interesting how they can do whether that's against Ishant and Bumrah, indeed against Ashwin, Kohli goes with.
Right. And the English selectors have made an interesting call with the squad selection. They've essentially broken down this series into two halves. So the first half will not have Johnny Bairstow, Sam Curran, Mark Wood, and I think Joss Butler will return home after the first test. So Ed Smith, the national selector, he's promised that more players will be rotated over the course of the series. And the reason given is that England don't want to overwork their multi-format players. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think I think you suggested that maybe there's been a few rumblings in India. This is a bit disrespectful, perhaps, with a player as good as Butler going home.
Especially when India sent a full-strength squad to Australia. It's another matter that they kept dropping like flies by the end of this tour. But they did send their first choice full-strength squad for a long tour.
Well, I mean, I can certainly see that point of view. I mean, what I would say, I mean, obviously, Ed Smith is, he does like to get funkier than even Michael Clark with the way he operates. And he, a couple of things. I mean, there are some people that would suggest that Ben Foakes coming in for Joss Butler isn't actually weakening the side, especially in India. Yeah, we're keeping up the stunts is so important, but Butler was actually phenomenal, both to the quick bowlers and spin in Sri Lanka. So, I mean, some people, sort of Gloveman fetishists, that sounds a bit wrong, but purists of the wicket-keeping art, sort of actually quite thrilled to see folks coming in. The other thing with Bairstow, I mean, again, I think Indian fans do have a special place for him. His wonderful, opening partnership with Bairstow in the IPL. I mean, I'm excited to see Ollie Pope come back in. For me, he reminds me, because of his tenacity and this wonderful jumping square cut he plays, he reminds me a bit more of Robin Smith.
I thought he reminded me of Ian Bell.
Well, exactly. Well, this is the thing that people say, but that's more of a physical resemblance. Whereas in the manner in which he bats, it's not quite as sort of Rolls Royce as Bell plays. He's got a slightly sort of grittier edge to him, but wonderful player. And also Zach Crawley as well is a really wonderful player. So I still think we're looking at an England middle order of Stokes, Root, Zach Crawley, and Ollie Pope. And so I mean, I can entirely see why people are a bit
honest
about some of
as a sidebar. I am a fan of the Chennai Super Kings in the IPL, and I'm slightly disappointed that Sam Curran will not be playing in Chennai, where we are going to have the first two tests. I've become a fan of his, not just because of the IPL. I just feel like he is one of those talented players, and it's sad that we won't get to see him for more than two tests in this series.
Well, he was wonderful in the IPL. I mean, he was probably the only member of that Chennai squad that won't be eligible to get the first wave of vaccines.
Yes,
it was an incredibly aging squad, and he performed wonderfully. And again, I think he's obviously, and I think in the series in England a couple of years ago, he was a thorn with the bat and with the ball. But I mean, it is a shame for him. But perhaps there's a player that people might not know so well. I know the risk of sounding like an Australian commentator, I haven't seen that much of, but and that's Ollie Stone, who's a right arm fast bowler who's coming to the squad. He's pretty nippy. He can get up to sort of 90 miles an hour. He's got a really sort of smooth action, but he really sort of plonks his front foot down. It might sound a bit of a weird comparison, but he reminds me a little bit of Wagner. He's substantially quicker than Wagner, but he also bowls. He's capable of bowling that really sort of awkward, horrible, irritating sort of length that Wagner bowls as well. So probably not the best place for a fast bowler debuting. Well, actually, he played against Ireland. I think he's got one test, but I'll be interested to see how he gets on.
So
if he plays.
I still want to address the fact that England are not sending like a full strength squad even for the first two tests. Would England do this if this was an Ashes series? Do you know? Is it a case of not taking the India tour as serious as they would do a series against Australia?
Well, I think probably, yeah, it's fair to say that. But I mean, to be honest, I think England, I mean, like India, we are in a position where it's maybe not clear exactly what our first 11 is,
True.
to be honest with you. I mean, I'm convinced Curran would be in the first
Okay.
11. And, you know, as wonderful cricketer as he is. But I mean, I do agree with the point. I mean, everything is the Ashes in England. And I mean, this, I think to some extent, this is another reason why, as successful as Dom Bess has been early on in his career, there is a sort of slight fear that, you know, we're going to get to the Ashes, it's going to be gobbled up like, you know, 100 off spinners before him, maybe make a battling half century when we're 3-0 down in the series. And that will be his main contribution to the test, to the series. So, yeah, I mean, I see what you mean. I mean, England's, yeah, I think you're right. It wouldn't happen with an Ashes series, but on the other hand, I mean, I'm not sure that England could say what exactly. I mean, I don't know if Bairstow would be in the first 11. I don't know if Curran would be in the first 11 at the moment. So,
well, I
yeah.
would think that Bairstow might, just because, you know, thanks to the IPL, he has probably tons of experience playing against the spinners in subcontinental conditions, even if they did play in the UAE in the recent edition. I would think he would make a good case for himself to be in that 11, the playing 11.
Yeah, I guess so. I mean, I guess we'll see how it pans out. I mean, I am a big fan of both Crawley and Pope. I mean, I think they both have the games to do well. But can we play this conversation back at the end of the series and see? But yeah,
Yes.
no, I completely take the points, and yeah, I think you're right. It wouldn't happen.
All right.
For an Ashes
Well, I
series.
don't want to get too hung up on it. I don't want to have an air of grievance. As long as we get some good cricket, you know what? It doesn't matter.
Sure.
I mean, India fielded, I don't even know if we would consider India A or India B, you know, for that last test in Australia, and they still did well. So we never know. I don't want to discount the England team just because they don't have some of their star players, so to
Yeah.
speak. But I do want to get your thoughts on a few players in the squad. You've already talked about a few of them, but particularly the ones that most non-English fans wouldn't be too familiar with. So here's what we can do. When I say their name, I just want you to give me a concise description of the player and what to expect from them. You're an English teacher. I think you can do this. Does that sound good?
Okay, well, we'll have a go. Yes, sure.
All right, Dom Bess.
Well, Dom Bess, as I've said, I mean, he's an off spinner. As I say, I think a little bit trapped in the leg spinners, but he doesn't quite have the accuracy. Graham Swan is sort of desperate to come in and work with Dom Bess because he thinks he's seen a couple of technical glitches that can be easily fixed and which will improve his accuracy. I can't wait to see how he goes because I think it could be extremes for him. But
okay,
yeah,
Zach Crawley.
Well, Crawley, sort of very, if you like, sort of quite tall, upward player. Yeah, again, he's had great success very early in his career. He was asked to open in Sri Lanka, which was obviously challenging, and he failed basically. So he particularly failed against the left-arm spin and Buldenia. So I think he'll be delighted that Jadeja isn't going to be playing. But again, there's a lot of stock in him, and yeah, he's a classy.
Okay, Ben Foakes.
Well, Ben Foakes again, as I said earlier, he's fantastic clubman. He's in the tradition. Bit specialist wicket keepers in England that we moved away from a little bit, but county stalwarts get very, very irate that he's not in the side. He's I don't know if this will have a bearing on the series. He's considered one of the most handsome cricketers on the circuit as well.
Okay.
Don't know if that's the sort of analysis you want, but and a good bat as well. Doesn't obviously have the X factor Buttler, but he's the sort of Saha to Butler's pants, if
Okay.
you like.
All right. Dan Lawrence.
Well, Dan Lawrence, I think, is another one that's coming out for the first two tests. So again, I'm excited to see him play because again in the subcontinent, because he's maybe not typically for an English player. He's incredibly wristy. His manipulation of the ball is impressive. His wrists, and he the sort of player that you need patience with. I mean, he's not quite on the innovative level of someone like Maxwell, but he's not a conventional sort of English batsman. So I think there will be sort of frustration with him at times. But I think if England persist, then there will be rewards. But I think, again, he's one of the ones sidelined the first couple of tests.
Okay. Dom Sibley.
Yeah, Sibley has perhaps the greatest grimace in world cricket. He looks like a man chewing a wasp and a lemon at the same time when he bats. But that sort of fits in quite nicely to sort of his grizzled style of play. He's not he's certainly not David Gower in terms of straight play, but he's an impressive individual. He's got good temperament. He was being sledged by Dick Weller in the final test of the Sri Lanka series. Dick Weller said to him, "Are you going to be opening in India?" Obviously alluding to the poor series that he'd had up to that time. And Sibley just said, "Well, maybe not. I haven't batted very well in this series."
Well, that's very honest of him.
Yeah, it was such a sort of simple bit of honesty, but it's very disarming to a sledge. I mean, yeah. So, but he's tenacious. There's a lot to admire.
Okay, and finally Ollie Stone.
Well, Ollie Stone, the guy I mentioned earlier. Yeah, so he's this bowler. He's quick. He had quite a lot of injury problems. You see his action and it's incredibly smooth, but he has had a lot of injury problems. So he's coming in quite an interesting guy at the field, actually. In the off season, he works on, he reports on non-football for his local radio station. And he's actually started a company supplying willow to bat manufacturers. So I haven't got any witty quip about that. I just think it's quite interesting when players.
See, these are the kind of facts that we are looking for, James. So I appreciate
that. Again, it might not have an exact bearing on the Test series result. Anyway, yeah.
All right. Well, awesome. It will be interesting to see how these players shape up against a red-hot Indian side. But James, before we kind of wrap this up, let's talk about you. So you are an English teacher in the Czech Republic. So have you been doing the Lord's work by teaching cricket to your students?
Well, I do my best. There is actually quite a good cricket structure here. There's a Czech Cricket Association that this guy runs. People can, if you just Google that, Cricket Czech Republic, you'll see the internet web page, and his Twitter. Yeah, I mean, I do try and slip in a bit of cricket now and again. We rarely get beyond the, like baseball, isn't it? Sort of stay with students. But once I show them a bit of IPL, then yeah, they sort of have a bit of interest. But no, I wouldn't say it's sweeping like wildfire.
We'll give it time. We'll give it time. Just one day at a time. Just kind of feed them some highlights of or clips, Ben Stokes or Virat Kohli. That'll pull them in.
Well, they're massive hipsters here, so Stokes tattoos.
Oh, okay. See, there you go.
Yeah.
So what drew you to cricket writing, specifically satire-based cricket writing?
Well, I before this job, I'd worked profession where writing was important. I was a press officer for the European Union back in Britain. Maybe I did a very good job seeing that we had Brexit recently. So I don't know. It was, as you say, it was that sort of golden year or golden summer of blogging around 2011 where, everyone seemed to start doing it. And I don't know. I mean, I do write occasionally straight pieces, but I think, cricket just lends itself, I think, more than any other sport to sort of bizarre incidents we've seen in the last 24 hours. There's a row in Australian cricket about.
I know. I was going to bring that up. Do we know it is Labuschagne?
Well, I think there's been a bit of internet sleuthing going on, and it's Labuschagne has been identified as a player who took a cheese toastie onto the field with him, and Justin Langer has sort of clamped down on this sort of heinous act.
For those
But it's been
for people who don't know what we are talking about, we probably should clarify.
sure, yeah.
It is an article that came up in I forget the name of the newspaper, but typically what happens every time there's a poor series for any team, there are always some rumblings of discontent between the players and the coaching staff. So obviously now is focused on Justin Langer and how some players find him to be very intense. I don't know why this comes as a surprise to anyone who's observed even 2 minutes of Justin Langer.
Well, exactly, yeah, well, quite, yeah.
But yes, so the incident that you brought up, there was a player who was apparently stuffing toast in his pockets and going onto the ground.
Cheese toastie, I believe, or
Okay.
toasted lamb, maybe termed,
And
yeah.
I just loved Langer's response to that. So I would recommend people, find that article and read it. It's entertaining to us. I don't know how
Yeah.
entertaining it is to Australian fans.
Yeah, but it's just so ironic that Australia head back to South Africa where there was the sandpaper
Yes, where it all
incident,
began.
where it all began. I mean, the absolute very last thing that Australia be focused on is
Right.
their pocket, and here they are before they head off there, doing exactly that. So it is a small issue, but it does. I
Yes.
mean, these
It's
things
common
really
sense.
don't happen in isolation.
I
Yeah.
side with Justin Langer on this. It is just common sense. Do you want that to take the focus?
Yeah, it is a bit of a thing, but yeah, it doesn't speak particularly well of Harmony Camp, I think.
Yes.
So,
Well, I also know you contributed some lighthearted takes on the 2019 Cricket World Cup for First Post. Can we expect anything similar for the T20 World Cup this year?
well, I don't know, to be honest. I mean, as you say, I've started blogging again because I don't think it's any great secret to say that cricket writing, cricket media, like every other, squeeze a bit by
Right.
COVID. So there's probably not that many opportunities for people like me to write. I think cricket writing has changed a bit as well with CricViz and the very analytical based stuff, which I love and it's fantastic, and they have some wonderful writers sort of combining traditional writing and yeah, but I'm open to offers. Anybody wants to contact me, I'm more than happy to do something.
I think there's always room for lighthearted takes on the game, like you mentioned.
Yeah,
Cricket always throws up is that are ripe for making fun of, and I think there's some really good content out there. So I'm really looking forward, and I hope you have articles that you plan to write during the upcoming series between India and England. But James, I hope you come back at the end of the series and help break it down for our listeners. Whether
yeah, as long as you erase my predictions, youthful middle order and their prospects.
We'll see. You never know. They might just surprise everyone.
Well,
but
we'll see.
yeah. But till then, James, thank you so much for agreeing to come on our podcast and for giving your perspectives on the English side. For our listeners, you can get more of James on his Twitter account. It's at Pavilion Opinion. Do subscribe to his writing on pavops.substack.com. We'll put up the links in our show notes. So thanks again, James. Stay safe and talk to you soon.
Yeah, my absolute pleasure. Thank you.
So we have a special segment for all you cricket fans out there. So we have looked at the stats, we heard about the players. Now we're going to take a trip down memory lane. So this segment is called Blast from the Past. So hopefully the first of many that we will do. And this year we'll bring up some memorable moments from past India versus England encounters. So over to you, Nish.
Yeah, like in India versus England has a rich history of both on the field events and off the field events, and somewhere humorous, somewhere less humorous. But over the years, there was never any shortage of drama and excitement surrounding England series. So I've gone through memory lane here and dug up a few incidents that I wanted to highlight. So I think when you think of India versus England in the 2000s, one of the most significant events came in 2002 when India, going into this series after the insane high of the NatWest finals, we went into the summer of 2002, and I think we lost the first test in Lords, and then where Agarkar made his 109, which is like a stellar performance. And then in the second test, we were bailed out by a young Partha Patel, and we clung on to a dear draw. But however, the moment that I wanted to focus in this series was something that went really against what conventional thinking would have led us to do, or led most teams to do. Ganguly won the toss in Headingley in 2002 on a very overcast evening, and he decided to surprise everyone, including the interviewer Ian Bottom at that time. And he chose to bat first on an absolute green top.
I
like
remember this. Go ahead.
yeah. So
One of
nothing
my
would have,
favorite games.
like you couldn't have predicted that, 99 times out of 100. That's like one of the most random calls. And much to everyone's surprise, India, having batted very well on day one, and then Sachin came out aggressively, and Dravid performed as Dravid does, and then eventually we amassed 628 runs on a green top. And we also played two spinners on that wicket, with the thinking that we were going to bowl fourth. So I think that sent India to kind of a different pedestal from where we were before, and we were announcing ourselves to the world that hey, we are here, and we can do things against convention and not only challenge but also come out on top. So it was one of the most pivotal moments of Indian performances.
You're forgetting a
abroad.
very key player, Nish.
I was going to
Sehwag
say,
being promoted. I know Sehwag was promoted as opener in that
No,
series.
there's one
He
more.
was,
His finest moment
I
in.
was thinking of Sanjay Bangar.
Yes, that's the one.
oh, that's right. That's right.
Still one of the
course, who can
finest,
forget Sanjay Bangar?
India's finest. I don't know if I would call it a gamble, but he was not an opener, was he? He was like more of a middle order batsman with some
Correct.
seam bowling
Yeah.
occasionally.
Yeah, he played for Railways as a middle order batsman and also seam bowler, and yeah, that was the only spot he found, and did really well. And I think probably one other memorable thing from his career was in the 325 chase against West Indies in Ahmedabad, when
Yeah.
Dravid scored 100, he scored a quick 50 and allowed India to chase it down. That was probably a year
I
after
remember
NatWest,
that.
but
Yes,
for
I
some
remember
reason
that.
it's not remembered. Yep.
No,
So those were probably two of
Sanjay,
Bangar's finest moments.
Ravi Shastri even had this famous line, right? Like something like Sanjay Bangar has become a banger or something. I remember that vividly. I was like,
of course,
what is this
Shastri
guy
would come up
talking
with something
about?
like that. No,
Yeah.
I mean, he basically did what Pujara does, right? I think he just blunted the attack and just frustrated the bowlers so much, and then led the other, the Dravid, Tendulkar, and Ganguly to kind of make hay, because he had essentially
Yeah.
broken down the will of the bowlers. I still remember that as my favorite Sanjay Bangar moment, probably one of the finest moments of his career. All
The
right,
one
what's
other
up?
thing I remember from that series, Nish, before we go to the next one, is I remember coming home from school and seeing a young 16 or 17-year-old Partha Patel in gloves at Lords, and
Oh my
and
God.
I was like, what is going on?
Why are
We
they
have a
sending a
keeper who is
child?
16.
Why are they sending a child to
Exactly.
face the English team?
Yeah, and my mom knew how passionate I was, so she would joke, "Oh yeah, 5 6 years is going to be there," and I was like, "Okay, stop."
All right,
All right,
next.
now let's move on to the next one that we have. Again, keeping up with famous India versus England test matches. This was one that went in England's favor. This was in 2006 series, the Mumbai test. And this was a very unique time for England because they had a very successful 2005 Ashes. And, they went and beat Australia at home in what was arguably the most evenly challenged test match series until 2 weeks ago. So, and then I remember that England went to Pakistan after that series, and they didn't do well. I believe they lost the series in Pakistan, and then they toured India. So this test match gave the debuts to some great players like Piyush Chawla, Munaf Patel, and of course Alistair Cook.
Mhm.
Alistair Cook made his debut in Nagpur and scored a debut 100, which was still an inkling of things to come for England's greatest test match player or test batsman. And then Munaf Patel made his successful debut in Mohali. We did manage to win that game, and we went to the Mumbai test. So the thing that I wanted to focus here was India were in fairly solid position going into the Mumbai test in 2006. But however, things quickly turned sour when Dravid won the toss and decided to bowl first. And England went on to make 400 in the first innings, and then Sachin had his in 2004 had his tennis elbow issue and had some surgeries, and he was still like in patchy form, recovering on and off. And then he wasn't in very fluent nick in that series. And I remember Sachin got dismissed in the first innings after not scoring much, and then he was booed by the Wankhede crowd. And Sachin is a demigod in India, and he's not even. You don't even criticize him. That's the conventional thinking. And then there's this crowd in Wankhede that had the audacity to boo him. I'm not saying it's right or wrong. People are entitled to their opinions, but at that time it threw commentators and everyone in total shock. Whoa, this guy is being booed in India. And then I during my research for this podcast, and then I read that David Gower said that something to the lines of, if Sachin is booed, then that's kind of a good thing. That says that the rest of the folks are also like mere mortals, and there's nothing to be alarmed about playing Sachin or playing India at home. And then keeping up with that test match, day 5 was hilarious. We were trying to save the test match, and we went into, I believe, lunch at 75 for 3. Everything was fairly innocuous until then, and then Dravid got out, and then from 75 for 3, India crumbled to become all out for 100. And in that procession of wickets, something that still, like, there are moments in history that just stick in your mind as if it happened yesterday, right? This is one thing. I believe it was Sean Udall, getting some great purchase on the 4th inning in a deteriorating Mumbai wicket. And then Dhoni, he was instead of saving the test match, he came down the track and slogged one high up in the sky. And then Monty Pallister was the one trying to catch the ball, but he didn't get to the ball, right? I think it was a very comical event. And then 2 deliveries later, there was Dhoni again going after Sean Udall, as if we were in a position to win the match. And this time Monty did manage to catch it. And I was watching it and I was like, wait, is this a replay, or did Dhoni just do that again? And eventually Sean Udall finished with 4 for 14, and India were, all out for 100 and lost the series. And we came a lot of criticism, not only for Dravid's decision to bowl first, and then playing the way we did in the 4th innings trying to save a test match. It was quite stunning, and one of the all-time lows in modern Indian history at home, I would say.
I'm not surprised. I don't remember this game at all because I think I've suppressed these memories, especially Sachin getting booed and Dhoni getting to Sean Udall. I'm assuming that was probably Sean Udall's last game as well, because I've never heard about him since then. I mean, my only thought of the Sachin getting booed incident, see, I don't mind players not being treated as demigods, right? They're mere models. That is fine. You don't need to worship them, but I don't know. I'm not very comfortable with the concept of booing your own players. I know that Sachin was not the last person. I think wasn't Saurav Ganguly booed once?
Yuvraj was booed as
I
Wankhede
think
as well.
Yuvraj was booed once, yeah.
Yuvraj was booed,
Right.
and then even like Rishabh Pant, like just last year or
Yeah.
2019. So I just don't like that. I mean, people are free to do what they want. I just don't think it's very encouraging for the players you've gone to support, right? It's probably not at the
Right.
level of racist abuses, but you're still putting down someone who's performing in front of the whole world. That's their job, essentially. You're basically saying, imagine someone coming to your workplace and booing you while you're trying to do your job.
That would be
So,
awful. Yeah, I agree.
so yeah, that is my thought on that.
The one
And I
other
think
memory I have that was Andrew Flintoff flinging his shirt after that win. I think that was the Mumbai test.
Yeah.
Wasn't that he also did it in before the 2001 series, I believe, in Mumbai?
Yeah, I
And
think
that's
it
what
was
led
there.
to
That's
Ganguly's
why
reaction
Ganguly
in
took his
2002.
shirt off.
That's
Yeah,
right.
yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, I
Yeah,
got
that's why Ganguly took his shirt
He
off.
won.
I think
I
Mayank,
didn't know
you
that.
were mentioned that one, right? Or did Flintoff do it again? I don't know.
The Mumbai test once they won as well. Once India was 100 all out, he was flinging his shirt and running
I
around the ground
see.
or
Oh
something like that.
wow.
But that
But
was
Wow.
but now that you say that's happened before, maybe I'm mistaken. Maybe I'm remembering
I
some other
remember
game.
it being a one-day series between England and India, and I think he won
That's what I
the
remember
deciding
too.
game,
Yeah.
and he removed his shirt. Now, if that happened a second time,
You're right, actually, because it was a blue T-shirt. So
yes,
you're right. It
yes,
wasn't a
One
test
black
match. I would agree.
I was
shirt.
gonna
Yeah.
say if he did remove his shirt a second time, he's probably a big Salman Khan fan because he does love taking his shirt off way too much. Um, yeah, yeah, I remember that. That was I remember that incident, but I've suppressed that particular game because I normally try to suppress any memories of India losing terribly. So
And to Himanish's point about how the foreign media or the Sena media doesn't rate wins in India as much, or the conventional thinking, right? Like was that if you win in India, it's people shrug it off and move along, as opposed to when But I remember vividly the reaction after this series especially when after the Mumbai test, some reports in the English media, praised this to the point where they compared this to the Ashes win. So they, valued in their minds very highly that, this is like a unique achievement to beat a strong India at home. So that was something that struck a chord with me here.
okay.
So moving on to the next event that I have here is the 2000 series in England. This was a very, very fond series of mine personally because I managed to watch each and every ball, which I try to aim for every series, but life comes in the way and it doesn't usually happen. And this series is, can be remembered for many things from Zach's bowling to Ryan Side Bottom's amazing curly flocks where he tried to intimidate Dinesh Karthik. But the most vivid thing that I recall from here is the jelly bean incident in the second test match.
Yes.
Um, I know that Zach was batting, and then there was an incident where there was a bunch of jelly beans on the piece, and then Zahir Khan, in his typical anguish, was pointing, his bat at Kevin Peterson, and then Kevin Peterson retaliated, saying, "It wasn't me who threw the jelly beans. Find the right target." And it was a whole lot of like noise. And then Matt Pryor was very chirpy in the test match as well, if I remember correctly. And then eventually, Zahir did have the last laugh by leading us to an amazing win at Trent Bridge. He took 9 wickets, and I think it was one of India's famous wins after the Adelaide and the Headingley wins, and of course we eventually managed to go to Oval and score 600 odd runs with Kumble scoring 100. So it was a very memorable time to be an Indian fan at the time.
I have one question about that incident though. I've never understood what was that supposed to intimidate Zahir Khan? Like what is the whole point of jelly beans? Like if I saw jelly beans, I'm like, man,
I,
they should probably clean this up.
I
Like that is what my
right,
thought
right.
would
I
be.
mean, I don't really understand why they did it, but I'll tell you a random fact. Zahir Khan averaged 26 after the jelly bean incident. So I don't know what happened. Obviously, it wasn't just that, but it worked. Hey, it worked.
It's so weird.
Should throw more during the series for Siraj and Bumrah as well, I guess. But
Yeah.
yeah, I remember Zahir Khan's performance in the series, especially the way he came, over the wicket and his angle to take the ball away from the right-handers, one of his finest series away from home.
Okay.
So the next event again is in 2000s, right? Like 2008. This is on a more somber note. Immediately after the Mumbai attacks, I know India was in the middle of an ODI series, a 7-match series planned, and then the attacks happened in November 2008, and then England flew back with the final 2 ODIs being cancelled. However, they were, kind enough after the security measures were, confirmed to be adequate, and they returned for a 2 Test match series in India in December of 2008. This one, obviously cricket took a backstage due to a terrorist attack, but at the same time, cricket can only take a backstage for so long in India, right? It
Yeah.
immediately came into people's psyche soon after, and then the first Test match happened, and it was in Chennai. Day 4, when Kevin Peterson was the captain at the time, declared 311 for 9, setting India a target of 387 in 4.5 sessions, or four sessions, I believe. That innings of Sehwag, the 68 ball, 83 runs he scored, recording the English bowlers all around the park in Chennai on a pretty deteriorating wicket, mind you. It wasn't very flat, right? They still had like some good bowlers in Graham Swan and other. I believe Matthew Hogarth was still bowling at that time. And Sehwag came out and absolutely carted everyone out of the park and gave India an outside chance. And then on day 5, Sachin took that to a next level, first partnering with Gambhir, Dravid, and then Lakshman, and then eventually him and Yuvraj led India to a great victory. And the final shot of the match, Sachin's 100, and he immediately dedicated this to the victims of the Mumbai attack. And it was a very memorable Test match. The Mohali Test match after that was a mere footnote in history. It was a dull draw, and then that eventually gave India the 1-0 series win. But at that time, I believe 387 was a record fourth inning chase in India. I still believe it still stands today. If I'm not mistaken.
And I think since then, at least till Sehwag was around, no team ever, dared to set those kind of targets because they were always concerned or worried that Sehwag was always going to be the main threat for all those long chases because, teams knew that if he gave India a good start, then India have the batting to chase them down. So that was a Sehwag effect. And I don't know, I really hope the likes of, I know the styles are different, but the likes of Shubman Gill and Rohit Sharma, sometimes I wish they played that role. But that's probably a topic for another day.
Yeah, I
I
feel
think
like
Rohit Sharma was drafted in as an opener to play that role.
Right.
And I won't tell you how I got that information, but I know that for a fact that Rohit Sharma was indeed envisaged like a Sehwag role at the top of the order. And that's why he opened
Okay.
against South Africa and India.
Why are you teasing us? What? How do you
Yeah.
know that for a fact?
Give us your source.
It's an
Emil.
inside source. It's an inside source.
Okay.
Not an anecdote I can tell you off air, but yeah, I
Okay.
basically know that he was drafted in because he could play like Sehwag at the top of the order.
Okay.
This is an
That's
overheard
interesting.
conversation somewhere
Oh, okay. All right.
from a good source. So yeah.
All right,
Yeah, but
Nish, you got
unfortunately,
one more?
the criticism that Rohit Sharma has, is pales in comparison with what was levied at Sehwag, which is extremely unfair, I feel. But that's the way
Yeah.
Indian cricket rolls. To our final event from the blast from the past session for today is from the series 2011 series. Right after the high of the 2011 World Cup win for India, India toured England, and for most cricket fans, you just write the series off. Most Indian cricket fans, at least, right? It was a scar that happened, and the eventual series scoreline was 4-0. However, in the second Test match, there was one incident which came, into extreme focus, and this was the run out of Ian Bell, where Dhoni decided to call him back, an apparent spirit of the cricket, vague thing. So I believe it was on the eve of Ian Bell struck a shot. I don't remember off who's bowling, and then I believe Ishant Sharma or Praveen Kumar who tossed the ball back to Dhoni, and Asad Rauf was umpire, and the ball didn't go to the boundary, and Asad Rauf, for whatever apparent reason, I don't think he called over yet. But Ian Bell and Owen Morgan assumed that in declared a boundary and over was called, and they happily trotted off to grab a cup. But Dhoni, being Dhoni, got the ball and passed it to Abhinav Mukund, who was playing that series, if you guys remember, and he knocked up the bails. And by the law of the game, only cricket has laws. We don't have rules. So by the law of the game, it was deemed out. However, Ian Bell was like, if you can picture him, he was like, what was going on, right? Like, he didn't understand what was going on. So, and then Andrew Strauss and Duncan Fletcher went to Andrew Strauss and Andy Flower at the time went to Dhoni and Fletcher, and they were like, hey, what's going on here, guys? I don't think this round was in the spirit of cricket and stuff. And then it was unanimously decided to call Ian Bell back. But the funny part was right after the tea break when the players were emerging, the English crowd booed the Indian players, thinking that, they kind of like cheated and, there's accusations flowing, left, right, and center. But then they saw Ian Bell coming out and they all immediately, reversed rolled and broke into applause. And they were like, cheering on the Indian folks and Ian Bell for it. So that was pretty funny.
English crowds are fun that way.
Listen, there are two things I want to say. One, I don't know what you're talking about, Nish. That 2011 series never happened. India never turned England, and Australia never happened. And second, listen, I can talk about this for a long time. I just don't like this quote unquote spirit of cricket. That's just messed up a lot of things. Not just that incident. Like every time there is a run out at the bowler's end, or what they say, Munkat. Every time this thing pops up called the spirit of cricket, which is a very which is used more as a convenient, like, I don't know, excuse or reason given to justify why you don't like a particular thing. So anyway, I don't know, that particular incident, I don't mind Dhoni calling back Bell, just because, I mean, I get it from a human perspective. Like, hey, tea and snacks waiting. I'm ready to go. I've played for batted for quite a while. I'm ready to go.
Yes.
And it makes sense, and I don't have any issues with that. But I don't find fault with either of them. Either, Dhoni did what you would do. That's what you're trained, and your skills take over, your cricketing sense takes over, and you do that. But ultimately, common sense prevailed, and Bell was back. I'm just curious to know, did he score much after that? Do you know?
I don't think he did. I think he was already batting at a. I have to confirm this. Maybe close to a century or a little over a century, I think. So
Okay.
I don't think he.
I mean, ultimately, it all balances out. I'm probably sure he, had a run of bad form, or he he lost his place in England. So things happen. Like, cricket is always, I feel it's a great leveler. Like, it just balances out a lot of things. So
And Dhoni did win the ICC Spirit of Cricket Award earlier this year. So I guess,
yay! Great.
he had this in his mind when he recalled Bell.
He was playing the long game. He was like, one
Yeah.
day they will recognize me for this spirit of cricket thing.
Let's conveniently forget the part in the IPL where he literally stared at
All
the
right. No,
umpire
no, no,
for
no.
giving a
Let's
wide.
not bring that up. No, let's not bring that up. All right. Okay, we'll end this segment with a fun fact. Himanish, do you have something for us?
All right, so you have a lot of named trophies in cricket. So, for example, Sri Lanka and Australia play the Vaughan Muralidharan Trophy. We play the Border Gavaskar Trophy with Australia, and so on. The India-England series is peculiar in the way that the series played in England is called the Pataudi Trophy
Pataudi,
after
yeah.
Mansoor Ali Khan Pataudi, and the one in India is called the Anthony de Mello Trophy. This was named after the first secretary of the BCCI in 1951. He was the guy who founded the BCCI. So this is a fun fact that not many people might know, that the trophy is named differently in the two countries.
So when they win, let's say they win the trophy, England wins the trophy in India, and then when India goes back to England to play them, they're essentially winning
Playing
different.
playing different trophies. In fact, Sharmila Tagore requested the BCCI to rename the Indian trophy as well after her husband, Pataudi Trophy, but I think they refused to do it because this was to honor that guy who was the founder of the BCCI. Yeah.
So what happens
So it's very peculiar.
if India loses the trophy at home and then they win the trophy abroad? Do they get a different trophy? And England
Yeah,
get to keep the one?
yeah.
It looks completely different.
It's a different
right?
trophy. Yeah, it's a
That
different
is
trophy.
ridiculous. Only in cricket.
Yeah.
Only in cricket. Well, that's it for this episode. Tune in next time as we take on one of the more polarizing issues in international cricket, the umpire's call in DRS reviews. We'll also have more special segments coming in the next few weeks, so that will be a lot of fun. Meanwhile, there's plenty of cricket action to keep us occupied and throw up a few potential topics to talk about in future episodes. So do subscribe to this podcast to be notified of new episodes. Follow us on your social media feeds. Do spread the word about this show. For more details, please visit our website at thelastwicket.com. We have added a bunch of links from today's episode over there, including all the statistics and numbers that we talked about. Once again, thank you for listening, and we hope you come back for more. For now, from all of us here at The Last Wicket, have a great week, everyone.